In this video, we're going to be looking at fighting game character select screens. The best place to start, of course, is the genesis of the modern fighting game, the one, the only, Street Fighter II. The roster is quite small, having only 8 characters, and you think that'd mean there would be a lot of unused space, but that isn't the case. Street Fighter II uses its space effectively. The characters are laid out in a simple grid with character portraits to the left and right of the screen so you can get a better look at the fighter you're selecting. My favorite part of this has to be the world map, because it lets you know where the characters come from, and that in itself can lead you to picking a character. In fact, I guarantee a lot of kids picking up Street Fighter II picked Ken over Ryu just because he was from the United States. A small detail I love is there are these animals all over the world map. Even though there's no Australian fighter, there is a picture of a koala. It's unnecessary, but it's charming. Out of the gate, Street Fighter II does a good job with its character select screen, and through its iterations, it would slowly evolve, adding more and more characters. I think it was at its best in Super Street Fighter II because it keeps all the charm of the original character select screen, but just makes everything look a little bit nicer. Super Street Fighter II would simplify things, but add a more detailed background with the game's logo. I also like how the characters are placed on the select screen. You've got the original World Warriors, then you've got the newcomers, and finally the 4 Kings of Shadowloo at the end. Street Fighter II did a lot of things right, and it goes to show that keeping it simple is extremely effective. It's not flashy, there are no crazy effects, it's just good old-fashioned Street Fighter. Many would consider the Marvel superheroes larger than life, and their game's character select screen reflects that. Immediately, you see these skyscrapers with huge TVs at the top that display the characters, giving it this larger-than-life feeling. The character icons have their perspective skewed to give it a 3-dimensional look. Being comic book superheroes, the characters are, of course, striking their best action pose. But the best part of this select screen is after you pick your character, they come exploding out of the TV in bombastic fashion, which transitions right into the versus screen. Definitely one of the cleanest select screens to gameplay transitions I've seen. This character select does a good job of capturing that superhero feel, like they jumped right off the comic pages to the arcade screen.
One for JJ.
Street Fighter III didn't set the world on fire when it came out, and its character select screen reflects that. You've got a basic grid layout like Street Fighter II, but slanted and given effects like drop shadow and gradient outlines to make it pop against the background. There are these huge character art sprites that look great. The detail is really impressive. I don't like the weird 3D map background, it's just boring. Speaking of boring, the character icons are just the characters in their idle animation. Despite coming out years later, I feel like Street Fighter III's initial character select screen can't hold a candle to Street Fighter II. It seems like Capcom also felt this way because just a couple of months later they'd release Street Fighter III's second revision, Second Impact, and with it a new character select screen. One word comes to mind when I look at this: generic. Nothing about it feels like Street Fighter. And if you got rid of Ryu and Ken, you'd have no idea it was. I do think changing from a grid style to triangles is interesting, and the character icons this time are much better. Capcom would go back to the drawing board again for Street Fighter III's final iteration, and man, did they manage to outdo themselves.
Welcome to the world of Street Fighter III. Prepare for battle.
Third Strike's vibe is vastly different from its predecessors, and you can hear it in the select screen music. It's very catchy and really enhances the character selection experience, which sounds ridiculous and pretentious, but I'm positive if you ask any fighting game fan, they can at least recite some of this theme. Third Strike bumps up the roster to 19 playable characters and opts to display them in a vertical fashion. This makes the select screen feel bigger and gives ample room for the character portraits on the left and right of the screen. Speaking of portraits, the portraits were drawn by veteran Capcom artist Daigo Ikano, and they look amazing. Some of the best we've seen in the Street Fighter series. The icon change from Second Impact returns, and like before, each shows a little bit of personality. The last bit I want to mention is the animated gradient around the character you're selecting. It stands out well against the black ovals and does a good job at making sure you don't lose your place on the select screen. Much like the gameplay of Street Fighter III, the character select screen had a rocky start, going from formulaic with the initial design to really generic with Second Impact, and finally nailing it with the third strike. Catchy music and interesting layout, good looking art, all of these elements are combined to make one of the best character select screens we've ever seen in a fighting game. Let's take a break from Capcom and take a look at one of their main SNK, like Capcom, made a metric ton of fighting games in the 90s. Why not just look at the very game that was made to compete with Street Fighter II, The Art of Fighting? The Art of Fighting's character select screen is nothing special. In fact, it's a carbon copy of Street Fighter II's character select screen without any of the charm. Although, I'm sure most of the budget of this game went into making these huge, highly detailed character sprites. On the other hand, The Art of Fighting 2 is the polar opposite. The character select screen is laid out like a carousel. This is definitely eye-catching, but can be a chore to navigate. The background this time also has a little bit of texture, making it contrast well with the characters. The Art of Fighting 2's character select screen is a major improvement over the first, but The Art of Fighting 3 would go in a completely different direction. Every character is now walking at the bottom of the screen like they're in a Beatles album, and the highly detailed character sprites are finally fully and proudly displayed. The smaller sprites at the bottom give you a good look at each character, and something about them marching in that line is just eye-catching. Once you hover over them, you get to see them in full detail, so you can really make an informed choice if I want to play as Orange Ryu or Steven Seagal. This character select screen isn't too crazy, but I think it conveys what it needs to, and it's easy to use. An all-around, well-made character select screen. The Art of Fighting isn't SNK's only fighting game series. There's also Fatal Fury. Today, I'd like to spotlight one Fatal Fury game specifically, Fatal Fury 3. Fatal Fury 3's character select screen is unique. Instead of being your standard boxes with character icons, it's simply just the characters standing around like they're taking a group photo. It's straightforward, and I like that, although I do find it funny that most of the characters here are on good terms, and you'd expect them to be friends, but then you just got Geese chilling in the back. I have a feeling he wasn't invited. This character select screen fits in well with the world of the game itself, something you don't see often, which is why I think it's such an interesting example. Other Fatal Fury games would have more standard character select screens, making this one even more of a memorable outlier. So far, all of the character select screens we've looked at haven't had that many characters on it. Fitting a small amount of characters on the screen isn't that hard, but what do you do when you have a huge roster? That's exactly the problem SNK had to solve when creating the King of Fighters. In KOF 94, SNK was still trying to figure out what KOF was going to be. This is the only game in the series that does not let you edit your team. So on the character selection screen, you don't pick your characters, but country. The same thing I said about Street Fighter II applies here as well, but there is a slight problem. China, Japan, the United States, and Korea are the only teams where all of the characters are from their respective countries. The rest are just imposters. Terry Bogard is no paisano, and Ryo Sakazaki is not my amigo. I feel like they just did this because it's what Capcom was doing. A lot of fighters back then blindly copied Street Fighter II, down to the color of the life bars, but I digress. Expecting the player to pick not 1, but 3 characters based only off of country is a big ask. Heck, nowadays people don't even play KOF because they don't want to pick 3 characters. Other than that, I like that each character is given enough space so you can see their design. Unlike Second Impact, the red and blue contrast well with the globe in the background, and having the SNK logo indented into it helps it stand out. I could do without the giant KOF 94 logo, however. Country shenanigans aside, not a bad first try. Let's see what they come up with next in the King of Fighters 95. KOF 95 unceremoniously dropped the flag gimmick, and now you're given the choice between pre-made teams or edit teams. A little detail that I noticed was that the top 3 teams are SNK's big 3 when it comes to fighting games: King of Fighters, Art of Fighters, and Fatal Fury. The only one missing is Samurai Showdown. Once again, SNK has plastered their logo all over the background, but it's got this fancy scrolling effect this time. If you look at the character portraits from left to right, there is a subtle yellow to orange gradient. You'd miss little things like that unless you really looked at it. And I don't know, I just feel like it gives a nice bit of visual flair to an otherwise simple character select screen. KOF 95 is a big step up from 94. Looking at it, I don't feel too overwhelmed, but can they keep up their momentum for the King of Fighters 96? 96 is almost a carbon copy of 95's character select screen, but it adds character portraits. I like the idea, but adding them in the middle of the screen just splits things up. I'm only just now noticing how stone-faced serious Terry looks. I always perceived Terry as this carefree, friendly guy, but here, he looks like he's ready to kill someone. Which makes sense. His mortal enemy is right under him after all. 97 would depart from this design and go for something a lot simpler. The character select screen was made smaller, making it a lot easier to read everything. Your eyes can easily go left to right and see every character within the blink of an eye. The only thing I don't like about this layout is how they handle characters without teams. They're just shoved in at the bottom and it just stands out. 98 improves upon the groundwork laid by 97. Whoever designed this character select screen definitely put a lot of thought into how they wanted everything laid out. Depending on where they are on the screen, the boxes are slightly tilted. I think so that your eyes would be guided easier across the screen, but I'm not sure. It certainly looks nice. Also, the character boxes aren't flush with each other. Again, depending on where they are on the screen, the arrangement is different. They even fixed my issues with single entry characters. Putting the random box between the 2 single entry characters fits the 3-person layout and just looks good. My only issue with 98's character select screen is the background is again red and blue with KOF scrolling behind it. What's up with the late 90s having half red, half blue backgrounds? KOF 99 is interesting because it's the first KOF game to have 4 character teams. You'd think this might mess things up, but all things considered, KOF 99's character select screen is great. No space is wasted here. The characters are placed in the middle while portraits and team composition is relegated to the sides. Using these long rectangles for teams looks great, and using the single entry characters to bridge the gap is genius. KOF 2000 would incorporate bigger character portraits like 96, but unlike 96, they're not smack dab in the middle of everything. These portraits are extremely detailed and full of character. They're some of the best in the series. The character select screen this time is split down the middle. On the left, they face the left, and on the right, they face the right, except Kyo and Iori, who are facing each other because, of course they are. Like KOF 97, I find this one to be easy on the eyes because the characters are consolidated in one single space, making it easy to scan and find your favorite character. 2001 is a lot less exciting though. It's almost like a swap of KOF 2000, but a lot less interesting. The background is basic and generic. It doesn't feel very KOF-y, if that makes sense. Probably because the game wasn't being developed by SNK, but Eolith. which is a rabbit hole we will not be going down today. At the very least, the portraits still look just as good or even better than they did in 2000. Something I will give credit for is the teams are color-coded. It's yet another small detail, but hey, it's there. 2002 goes back to basics, meaning we are back to classic 3-person teams. I don't have much to say about this one. It's rather unremarkable, but gets the job done. The characters are a little too squished in on the right of the screen, and for some reason the timer takes up a sizable chunk too. There's just too much wasted space on this one. Last but not least, KOF 2003. 2003 takes the best aspects of the last few character select screens and makes something great. You've got the portraits and backgrounds from 2000, the individual team colors from 2001, and the layout from 1999. For the last Neo Geo King of Fighters game, they really nailed the character select screen on this one. The only real problem with this character select screen is, after you're done, you have to play the King of Fighters 2003. And that was all of the KOF character select screens from 1999 to 2003. SNK tried every design under the sun, and generally I think they pulled it off without much issue, but I can't help but feel like there was a lack of design cohesion, especially towards the later years. So far, we've looked at Capcom fighting games and we've looked at SNK fighting games. The question is, what happens when both of them combine to make a single fighting game? Why, you get Capcom vs SNK, a series that is just oozing with style. The menus, the music, the characters, the gameplay, all of it just works so well. That shouldn't be a surprise, since Capcom did majority of the work on Capcom vs SNK, and as we know, late 90s Capcom's fighting game division was on the top of their game. Today, I'll be looking exclusively at Capcom vs SNK 2, as I find it the most interesting. As soon as you select your groove, you're thrown right into the character select screen. I'll admit, it's a bit overwhelming, but in a really good way. With this many characters on the screen, it feels like every time you look, you find someone new you didn't see before. Instead of having a box that moves around the screen, you've got a pointer, like a computer. I've never really been a fan of having a pointer in games with controllers. It just can't move as fast as a mouse, and makes precise selection a lot harder, making the character selection process a lot worse. Something unique to Capcom vs SNK 2 is that it has two artists for character portraits. Shinkiro, the SNK artist, drew for the Capcom side, and Kinu Nishimura, the Capcom artist, drew the SNK side. Ironically enough, Shinkiro would go to work for Capcom, where they're still working today, and they're just as good now as they were back then. Having two distinct styles for each company is cool because it's really like the worlds are colliding here. The use of the yellow diamonds in the general design makes everything uniform and helps CVS2 have a cohesive style that the two companies' characters can stand on top of instead of trying to do a mix of both. I can't talk about this character select screen without talking about the announcer, who just won't stop talking. He really makes it sound like this huge tournament is about to go underway. I talk about him and other fighting game announcers in my video dedicated to the topic, so if you find that interesting, go check it out. CVS2 is near perfect when it comes to a crossover fighting game character select screen, but there is one that outclasses it. A character select screen that is so iconic, people who haven't even played the game can tell you where it's from. Let me take you for a ride.
Select your heroes.
This right here is the holy grail of fighting game character select screens. When I got the idea for this video, this was the one that popped into my head immediately. It's just so iconic. The music, like in Third Strike, is instantly recognizable. Despite being a simple loop with the lyrics, "I'm gonna take you for a ride," repeating over and over. You've got one side Marvel, one side Capcom, all laid out on this wireframe sphere, which complements MVC2's mind-boggling 56 character roster, helping it look bigger than it is. Just like CVS2, the amount of choice can be overwhelming, but What MVC2 does differently is segregate the characters vertically, making a clear distinction from the Marvel and Capcom sides. The background uses 3D to contrast the character selection globe while keeping things dynamic looking but not distracting from the selection process itself. 3D text is also used to add extra style to the otherwise static globe. The artwork this time around is done by legendary Capcom artist Bengus, who is most known for his contributions to the Street Fighter and Darkstalkers series. This may be his best work. He captures the anime-esque aesthetic of the Japanese Capcom characters while still being able to make the American Marvel characters look authentic. The characters themselves are displayed in full profile with cards behind them that eventually forms your team. If I had to criticize this at all, it'd have to be this aspect, as the still sprites are so lifeless compared to everything else going on here. I'm not the biggest fan of Marvel vs. Capcom, but something about this character select screen just sticks with you. It can't be nostalgia for me. I didn't grow up with Marvel 2. Yet this character selection screen lives rent-free in my mind even after I've played hundreds of fighting games. That alone must mean that it's doing its job well. I might not be able to put it into words exactly why, and I can observe the elements, but something about this is just right. I mean, obviously, because people even cosplay as this thing. Have you ever heard that before? Someone cosplaying as a character select screen? The Marvel vs. Capcom 2 character select screen is simply amazing, and it lives up to its promise. It certainly takes you for a ride. And that was my video on fighting game character select screens. I hope you enjoyed it. Truth be told, I have a ton more material to work with here, but I didn't want a 20-minute video to turn into an hour-long video, so I decided to cut it here. If you found this video interesting and you'd like to see a part 2, let me know, because like I said, I've got a ton more material to work with. But until that time comes, have a great day, and bye for now.